Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today to find out more about the Belmont Forum and how you can become Belmont Applicable. Today, I'm Amanda Shores, and I am on the Belmont Forum Secretariat. I'm happy to be with you here today, and I will be the moderator for today's session. And the majority of you here with us today are new to the Belmont Forum, and so we welcome you and thank you for being here. This is excellent because the Belmont Forum's goal is to expand its reach even further across the globe and in the global South. So I'll just give you a brief introduction to the Belmont Forum, but we'll talk a lot more about it, of course, during today's session. The Belmont Forum is a worldwide group of funding agencies that support researchers to come together from around the world to study global environmental change issues in a transdisciplinary manner. Today, you are joining us for the first in the Be Belmont Applicable series, our Alumni Highlight panel. You will be hearing from current and past Belmont Forum awardees and an expert from a Belmont Forum panel. Today, we will discuss the broad overarching principles that need to be followed in order to be eligible for our funding. But don't forget to join us this Wednesday, May 19th at 9 a.m. So the same exact time this Wednesday on the SRI virtual platform for the second part in the Be Belmont Applicable series, the technical submission, where we will go through the finer technical aspects of submitting a proposal that is eligible for our funding. And we will also share with you a sneak peek at our upcoming funding opportunities that we anticipate supporting in the upcoming future. So you're definitely not going to want to miss that. The 2021 Sustainability Research and Innovation Congress, or SRI, which the Belmont Forum is co-hosting on June 12th through the 15th. SRI will be an excellent opportunity for you to create your networks and build your projects that are Belmont applicable for our funding opportunities. And we encourage you to come join us at SRI to engage with us even more. Now let's run through a few housekeeping items. So in your Zoom window at the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you should see the mute button. So please make sure that you are on mute during our meeting today. And you can keep your video on, but if you're having bandwidth issues, you can shut that off and that might help. We will have time for questions at the end of this session. And so if you want to add your questions into the Zoom chat window, that's at the bottom middle part of your Zoom window, and we will be monitoring the chat throughout. Please don't use the session chat function, just use the Zoom chat function. And with that, I would like to thank so much for our panelists for being here today and for joining us. I will first introduce Eleanor Fisher. Eleanor is a professor at the Nordic Africa Institute in Sweden, focusing on transformative approaches to sustainability, poverty reduction, and participatory development. Eleanor is a team lead from the Transformations to Sustainability Research Call. Welcome, Eleanor. Next, we have Peter Wangai, who is an expert in human environmental systems and community development. He is a lecturer at Kenyatta University in Kenya and is the team lead for the new Pathways to Sustainability Research Call. So we congratulate Peter and welcome here today. Next, we have Adetin Mustafa, who is a research fellow at the Nigerian Institute for Medical Research. She is an environmental epidemiologist with expertise in energy and in global health, and she has lent us her expertise on panels for selecting meritorious proposals. So she has a really well developed understanding of Belmont Forum principles. And last but not least, we have Esther Obonyo, who is an associate professor of engineering design and architectural engineering at Penn State, and is the founding director of the Global Building Institute. Her work is primarily in data mining and sustainable structural materials. And Esther is the team lead on the disaster risk and reduction research call. Okay. And just to double check, we don't have Lee with us here yet, do we? Oh, Lee, okay, thank you so much. Okay, and sorry, last but not least, we also have Lee Hanna joining us, who is a senior scientist in climate change biology at Conservation International's Betty and Gordon Moore's Center for Science, where he leads the organization's efforts to develop conservation responses to climate change. And he is the team lead on multiple Belmont Forum research calls. So he will have excellent insight for you all today. So thank you again to all our panelists for joining us here to share your knowledge on the Belmont Forum and to help us broaden participation around the globe and in the global South. With that, I am going to give our first question to our panelists, which should be very simple. So I'm just asking if you can please share with us an introduction to yourself and your interests, your research projects that are related to the Belmont Forum. So Eleanor, why don't you kick us off here?
Yeah, thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here sharing experiences today. So as Amanda said, I'm head of research at the Nordic Africa Institute, which works to support researchers across Africa and in the Nordic region. I have a project which is examining transformations to sustainability in relation to artisanal and small-scale gold mining. It's part funded by Belmont Forum and part funded by the EU Horizon 2020, has a team of 19 people over 2 continents, Africa and South America, 7 countries, about 10 different nationalities. So complex, but very, very enjoyable. Super learning experience all the way. We got hit by COVID, as everybody else has, right in the middle of our fieldwork. After a period of shock, we kind of regrouped. Now we have some excellent work coming out on our social science and transdisciplinary work with people across Brazil and different African countries. And this weekend, we've been putting together a fantastic virtual exhibition, which we didn't plan in the beginning, but hopefully it'll be good. So that's a little bit about me. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you, Eleanor. We appreciate that. Peter, why don't you give us a few minutes of introduction to your interests in your project?
Thank you so much, Amanda. Yes, this is a very important moment for me, and thank you for inviting us to talk about our projects. Now, I don't want to go to much of the details because it is very important for our listeners to note that the person who is speaking is the one who has been working with a very energetic team to come up with a topic which is on building urban community networks for sustainable cities in Africa. So this is actually my interest in the Belmont Forum projects, and I would say that this project has been informed by literature and the challenges that African cities are undergoing at the moment. And you know, the rate of urbanization in Africa is peaking. You know that the issues to do with the poverty in our urban areas, in our cities, it is also peaking. The issues to do with waste management, the issue to do with biodiversity loss, and of course, so many other issues related to climate change, the CO2 emissions. So that is basically the reason why we came up with this topic. Because we want to identify stakeholders who can come together and apply all the relevant knowledge that can help us to get out of this particular challenge. And therefore, our main aim for this particular project is to develop networks and communities of practice to address the interlinkages, synergies, and trade-offs. And these interlinkages trade-offs and synergies, we wanted to focus on the socio-economic and ecological components, because initially we've been having challenges whereby city problems that have been studied in isolated manner through maybe disciplinary divides. And therefore, this particular topic will try to address this challenge to bring the concept of transdisciplinary aspects to ensure that we have holistic approach to addressing the existing challenges. So allow me quickly also to mention the people that are working in this project. This project is going to focus on 5 cities in Africa. No, 60 cities actually, because we'll start with the Kumasi in the north. We will have Lagos in the West Africa. We will have Kigali, that is in Rwanda. We will have Dar es Salaam, this is in Tanzania. We will have Nairobi, this is in Kenya, and also Mombasa City. So these are the cities of focus, and they'll act as case studies to enable us understand this problem in a bigger picture. So just to mention very quickly about the core researchers in this work, from Lagos, we will have Olusola. Olusola will be very much active with the activities that will be there in Lagos. And he's going to work so closely with Olufemi Taiwo, who is from United States. And specifically, he's in Georgetown. That is where he teaches, Georgetown University in the United States. So when we come to Kumasi, this is whereby we'll work so closely with Dr. Benjamin Campion. Benjamin Campion is in the University of Kwame Nkrumah, University of Science and Technology. And now getting to Kigali, this is where we'll work with Dr. Josephine Malonza. And when we go to Tanzania, Dar es Salaam, we'll work with Mr. Shabani Soa. And when we come to Nairobi, we'll be able to work so closely with the Dr. Margaret Owol and Dr. David Mugo. And this forms the team. And of course, as we continue, we'll be engaging more people to assist us and also to network with them and also to learn from them, especially the projects that are already existing, like the one which is under the leadership of Esther Obonyo. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter. We appreciate that. Let's see, how about we kick this over to Addison?
So I'm actually coming from the perspective of panel of experts for Belmont specifically. But prior to Belmont, I'm an environmental epidemiologist, and one of the challenges you've come to realize in solving environment is the broad nature. So most of my research will have to work with other people from epidemiology disciplines, such like you'll have social scientists. And when I'm working on things that has to do with built environment, you have to work with urban planners, geographers, and sometimes toxicology. So oftentimes multidisciplines have to be able to contribute to whatever we are talking about on the impact of health on the environment. And one area that has really worked is I'm the chair of International Society for Environmental Epidemiology in Africa chapter. And we have a lot of people from different countries. We want to put together a story about Africa that is told by Africans. So one of the things to do is, just like Peter has done, we have had to work with other colleagues from different parts of Africa. Even there are a lot of people here in Africa. We are not an homogeneous continent. Even within a country, we could be very different. So it is quite important that we bring in local knowledge and context, which different people in different parts, even of Africa, can bring in. So my research has been in different, like I said, environmental epidemiology, and we're just organizing, we're starting a project called Nigeria Environmental Epidemiology Capacity Development Program. And even in statisticians, you bring in geographers, people that are knowledgeable about exposure assessment. So you have the complementary skills and people from different parts of the world coming together to be able to address what seemingly look like your own problem, but which you cannot solve if you do it within the country alone. Then you bring the expertise that possibly you don't have, you'll be researching.
Thank you, Adetin. We appreciate your response there. How about Esther? Can you please introduce yourself and your interests?
Right. Thank you, Amanda, and thank you everybody for having us here this morning. So as you said, my name is Esther Bonyo. I'm at Penn State University. In our project, we are looking at how to enhance the resilience of low-income housing using climate science and machine learning. So the background, we have for over 10 years been looking at the vulnerability of people who live in low-income housing. We've done a lot of work in Kenya, Tanzania. We have synergies with people in Mexico and India. And there's a big community of people who've been working continuously since the 1980s in the space of affordable alternative building materials and technologies. Now, fast forward to the present time, we all know that around the world, everywhere in the world, people are dealing with flooding. Like right now, as we're talking, there's terrible flooding that hit Kenya. There's some horrible videos that are circulating that I could not even watch. The things that we are trying to address through research include, eliminating human deaths, eliminating injuries. And after the video that I saw of cows being washed away, that is definitely going to be part of the equation. We also want to make sure that if people are displaced, we have some suitable, affordable structures that can be deployed very, very quickly. And all these things will require, first of all, learning. I pointed to the community in Brazil that has been working continuously since 1980s, and we are partnering with them because they are addressing flooding issues, but they also have the history of what they've been doing since the 1980s that we want to learn from, while we also develop solutions for countries such as Kenya, Tanzania, and Mozambique. We are also partnering with an intergovernmental organization that works across 14 countries in the Eastern and Northern African region. We are partnering with the local Red Cross, because Red Cross has been working actively in the area of disaster risk reduction. We are doing stakeholder engagement, and I'm very happy to hear Peter Wangai saying that he's open to synergies, because I was making notes as he's talking, because one of the challenges in the building sector, a lot of the growth in terms of where houses are popping up is in the informal sector, where they don't have access to architects, engineers, etc. So you have these precarious structures, which under normal weather conditions are not safe. But with flooding events becoming more intense, they're now becoming even more dangerous to people. And then we have this issue of how do we get the policy side of things to move quickly enough. So we definitely want the networks. And then coming back to Adesun, I was making notes as you're talking, because one of the things that we are also dealing with is what Professor Wandiga, who's a professor of climate science, calls kill me quick diseases, right? So outside of, that is not something that we can solve from an architecture or a structural design perspective. That will require synergies with people in the healthcare sector. So in a nutshell, our project has these synergies across the building experts, architecture, structural engineering. We have people from the public health side of things. We also have people who are coming in from computer science and climate science. We have demographers and also a social economic person. We are growing our network. We've just gotten into a partnership with the Engineering for Change, which has a worldwide coverage to try to see if we can very quickly translate the things we are learning into formats that are easy for people to digest. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Esther, for your response. Lee, why don't we close off here with your interests and background? Oh, you are on mute. Lee, you are on mute still. Hold on. There we go.
Yes, I'm Lee Hanna, and I may be unique here in that I work in the research division of a conservation group, an NGO. And several years ago, I led a French, Cambodian, and Canadian team to look at climate change issues in the Tonle Sap in Cambodia. And the purpose of that was to look at climate change issues for inland fisheries. Inland fisheries are sometimes forgotten or receive less attention than marine fisheries, but are incredibly important for feeding people. So that project is concluded. The project that we're just embarking on is focused on a different kind of fisheries at ocean fronts in the open ocean. These are areas with high productivity, often fished by multiple communities, multiple nations. And we're trying to understand how these dynamic systems, these ocean fronts, which are bodies of water that come together with different temperatures and different nutrient loads, how these dynamic features can be conserved as climate changes. That team involves the US team, Kenyan team, French and German teams. So we're just in the beginning stages of that project. We've had several project meetings virtually, and we're in the process of finalizing a plan to do our stakeholder outreach virtually as well, which is a challenge. So I'm sure we'll have lots to say about that. But those are the two projects that I'll bring to the table and be happy to answer questions about how they were designed and how they went.
Excellent. Thank you all for your responses. So I think what you can hear from all of our panelists today is that there were really a broad array of topics that were studied across all of our panelists. And they've really utilized this transdisciplinary approach where we are bringing together many different thought perspectives together to make the best sort of decisions that we possibly can. And also, as Adetin was mentioning about bringing together local knowledge that's at the heart of generating these sorts of responses to climate change. So let's move on to our second question. The Belmont Forum projects require researchers and stakeholders representing a minimum of 3 countries to be eligible for our funding. What are the initial steps that you took towards building a team project in terms of a broad expertise representing many different countries? And maybe we can start off with Esther. How do you make those critical contacts with researchers and stakeholders to meet the transdisciplinary and transnational mandate for our funding?
All right, thank you, Amanda. So as I shared in my introduction, the relationships that we leverage for these proposals are relationships which were already in place. So I talked about the synergies, for example, with the people in Brazil. Even though I've never traveled to Brazil, I have met them at this conference that is convened every 2 years. Actually, the first time I met them was in Burkina Faso. So for me, that was the starting point, that is the community that I have the highest affinity with. That's one of the communities that I have the highest affinity with in terms of researching sustainable and resilient low-income communities. So it was just a pleasant surprise when I looked at the list of eligible countries and Brazil was one of them. I reached out to them immediately because I couldn't do this without having that affinity group within the built environment perspective. And then some of my research also is in the area of artificial intelligence, but on the application side of things. And I do have some friends who are active in that area. One of them happens to be a friend of mine in one of the social media forums. So as I was talking about what I was doing, I was just joking and saying, do I have an artificial intelligence expert in the house? And then he sent me a private message. So that was kind of lucky. If he hadn't done that, I probably would have used the American Society for Civil Engineering forums. They have a global center for excellence in computing. And as I said, it's global, so it has a distribution across the world. But as I said, the friend turned out to be UK based, and we looked and said, oh, look, yeah, we have UK on this list. And then I went to school at the University of Nairobi, and prior to this call being issued, we were in dialogue. We've done several things together, but all of them have been from an engineering or architecture perspective. Yeah, but at the beginning of 2019, we visited the Institute for Climate Change Adaptation, and that was actually something that was done in collaboration with the National Council for Science and the Environment. They've changed their name now to the Global Council for Science and the Environment. We had gone, and it was an exploratory visit. So that relationship had already been established, and we had gotten into this pattern of talking every 2 weeks or so. So when the opportunity came up, I shared it with the center director, and he got very excited about it. So it was those networks, the 3 different networks that I belong to, that I went shopping. I shopped in those communities.
Excellent. Thank you, Esther. I like that you found someone just on social media. You know, that's sort of the way we do it nowadays, is connecting with people through those methods. Lee, why don't we kick it over to you? Can you tell us about how you made the critical contacts with researchers and stakeholders to meet our transdisciplinary and transnational mandate?
Sure. Yeah, in both cases, well, let's start with Cambodia, because that was an interesting case study in how we brought together a multinational team. That work began well before our Belmont proposal, and resulted from some work we'd been doing with the Conservation Field Office in Cambodia. That office had been working with communities in the lake and were concerned about development issues, but climate change was increasingly on their mind. And they asked us in the research division to look at what the climate change implications might be for communities and fisheries of the lake. So we, and this was 2 years before our Belmont proposal, we assembled a group of ecologists, and it happened to be an international group, to try and answer that question, since we weren't the specialists. And that group had had 2 or 3 meetings prior to the Belmont call coming out. And so when we saw the Belmont call, we thought, well, this looks perfect for us. We're already international. There was a connection to the French Development Agency that allowed some French participation that would support Cambodian researchers to be part of the team. And so pretty much everybody that was already involved in our team was able to participate. And we had contacts with some French researchers who we added to the team. So one thing I'd say is that it's tremendously useful just to have topics that you know, you're interested in pursuing. And in our case, it's kind of easy to put together international teams, because Conservation International works entirely internationally. So that's just sort of our mode of operation. And then this latest project looking at ocean fronts is similar. We had less developed effort with people that we knew. I'm based at UCSB in California, and we were interested in ocean fronts. It was the continuation of our interest in kind of unusual fisheries, if you will, and wanted to try and understand how we could better conserve life at ocean fronts, because we know that fisheries target those areas, but also species of international concern like whales and whale sharks are there. And we also knew that if you can better manage those systems, you can get better, more sustainable fisheries catches. And all of those things have been tried out in pilot activities, not by us, but other people in Hawaii and on the west coast of California. So we were interested in seeing whether we might be able to apply some of those techniques, which involved modeling what species would use ocean fronts, and when fisheries and species of conservation concern like sea turtles use the fronts, to keep the fisheries and the bycatch concerns separate. That work was underway, and we've written a couple of proposals to look at those issues. They hadn't been successful, but they involved people who'd been visiting faculty at UCSB, one from Germany, another woman who had contacts in France. And when the Belmont call came up, we had a couple of proposals that were similar in focus, and a team that was international, and it wasn't easy to write a proposal. I must say these proposals are tremendously challenging because you're working across time zones and national teams and multiple institutions. But we did have something to build on, and that helped a lot. And that's how we came to submit the proposal we did, looking at ocean fronts in the Mozambique Channel.
So it sounds like, Lee, like you had some pre-established networks that you were able to build off of. Okay, that's excellent. I'm interested to hear from our other panelists. Eleanor, how about you? How were you able to bring together?
Yeah, I'm going to echo a similar theme to both Esther and Lee, which is we came together before the call was announced. And I think this is really important, and a message that I give anyone who's looking for funding, having assessed many proposals myself. Grasp opportunities. If you've got a research idea, grasp opportunities to link to people, whether you're holding a webinar, whether it's writing a blog together, whether it's learn from failed proposals. We all have failed proposals. How well do you work together? So in our case, we were already a loose network of individuals. We saw the funding call. When it was announced, we checked the eligibility, who could fit, who couldn't. We did a similar scouting to Esther to bring in extra expertise, so it was a nice package. I think we liaised with Belmont to check that our criteria were correct. So that's really how we came together. We also invested ourselves in holding a meeting, to help bring ourselves together, writing the funding call, and that too was important. And we did it part virtually and part in real, because we were working across big geographies. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Eleanor. Peter, why don't you tell us, you just went through this process, so why don't you impart on us your knowledge on how you brought your team together with broad expertise representing many different countries?
Thank you, Amada, for again inviting me to share my experience. And just before I start, I think from what we've heard from Esther, Elena, and Lee, more or less, they had already existing networks on transdisciplinary research. And I think for me, it's a bit different, because this is my first project, which is dealing with a transdisciplinary approach to research. And therefore, my experience was quite different, given the fact that I had to look back and see whether I have contacts which can really meet the criteria which was set. So in other words, I had to look back into my networks where I've attended conferences, seminars, workshops. And you know, when you attend conferences, and especially for any kind of discipline, you know that most people in the same discipline, they tend to group together. No wonder why we have this idiomatic expression that a band of a feather flock together. So in other words, when it comes to transdisciplinary research, it kind of gave me the challenge to go beyond my, my discipline, so that I can meet the criteria. And one thing that I did is also to use other networks whereby we didn't only come together as people from the same discipline, but also probably it's a conference where you met biologists, you met sociologists, you met anthropologists, and even people in art. And sometimes you create contacts, and sometimes you think probably you may not go far with those contacts. But one cardinal rule for me is that despite the discipline that I've met on my way in my career, I've always kept that particular contact. So I think when it came to this particular proposal, that was an asset for me, that I knew of people who are purely in physical discipline, whereby they are doing physical development of urban centers. I have people who are very passionate about conservation of biodiversity in the cities. I had people who are very passionate about conflicts, which sometimes emerge in cities, and probably they are fueled by the poor-rich divide in the cities, whereby you find the section of the city where we have very poor people. Sometimes we have high crime, we have a lot of conflicts. So I thought that by pulling somebody who is very passionate about conflicts in the cities, it will add a lot of value to this project. And that's what I did. Actually, I built my team not from scratch, but it was not that easy because I had to look around. Sometimes you look around in a given country and you don't find any, and you have to get somebody outside your country. So this was a big challenge, but given the fact that there was that will, and there was that opportunity to go back to the database and check whom I can work with, that was a plus for me. I would say that I was also very fortunate and very lucky because just last year, I happened to attend a seminar which was organized by Pathways to Sustainability team. And I can say that from that particular seminar, I was able to get 3 participants. I was, and my team has 8 participants. It has 8 team members, but 3 of them, they came from that particular seminar. So what I'm saying is that for our listeners and for the participants here, it is always good to keep contacts of people that you've met. Whether they are in other disciplines, it is always good to keep those contacts. You never know when you need that person. And not only keeping those contacts, just get to know what is happening, because nowadays, as you've heard, problems in our society, they are defying the linear perspectives in addressing those problems. So we have to engage several disciplines. We have to go beyond the disciplines, and that's why we are talking about a transdisciplinary approach. So it is always good to keep those contacts. Of course, when it came to the nationality, it was not as difficult to get the criteria for transdisciplinary. So those 2 criteria, which were very key for the proposal, I realized that to get somebody who is from another discipline and be party to the proposed idea or concept is more difficult than just getting 3 countries. You can bring 3 countries, 4 countries, 5 countries at a go, but getting people and a team which can really work on a transdisciplinary research is not easy, but it starts with a step, and slowly you can build that particular network. And in the future projects, I'm very sure we will be talking like Esther, Elena, and Lee. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. That was wonderful insight. So it sounds to me like all of you really utilized a pre-established network, but you needed to bring in additional people to really fill out that expertise, which is wonderful. That's exactly what the Belmont Forum is looking for. And I really appreciated hearing you talk, Peter, about bringing in someone to look at the conflict aspect, bringing in artists, anthropologists. That leads us perfectly into our next question, which we are going to start off with Addison on this question. So Addison, the Belmont Forum requires inclusion of natural scientists, social scientists, and stakeholders. The definition of a stakeholder is quite broad and includes many people, organizations, and interests. Can you describe for us, coming from your background as being a panel on our experts, your take on stakeholders? What constitutes a stakeholder for you and your work?
Amanda? So the short answer is
Addington, just a moment.
Stakeholder.
Your audio is breaking up a little bit. I'm going to recommend that maybe you shut off your video to conserve bandwidth.
Okay. Is it better now?
That does sound better.
Hello, is it better now?
Yes, that's better.
Okay.
Go right ahead.
So
Thank you.
a stakeholder is individual or group that will be affected by your research, by the outcome. It could be local community, it could be government, it could be activists. So people that have interest, and when we're looking at a Belmont Forum, funding, you want to that will be impacted by your research or who have interest in it. Nowadays, funders have gone beyond putting their money on science for science sake. This is about doing things that will impact the community, that will impact the society. So a good proposal, one of the things we will look at is that have they identified those who will benefit, have interest, or be impacted by whatever work they are doing? And are they doing something that the stakeholder will be willing to take? Because it is important that the outcome, your profile, oftentimes you address a challenge by your work and you want the society to uptake the outcome of whatever you do. So like Esther said, Esther, when she was talking, she did mention that she found somebody in social media who could communicate in a language that a section of the stakeholders she has identified will be able to relate to it. So for us, when we look at a proposal, we want to be sure that how you are going to communicate the outcome of whatever you are doing to the stakeholders, those that have interest, those that will be impacted. You've identified that, and you've been able to go beyond that. I did this, I published in a journal. For those of us who are in science, I published in a journal. So be able to even have a dialogue, even training. Is there a need to train people that will be impacted? You need to also consider that. So stakeholder could be very broad, and it could be also specific to the type of projects, but it is important that we build bridge through our research between the researcher and the society. And that is one thing that Belmont Forum Fund often look for in proposal.
Excellent. Thank you, Addington. I think to save time, I'm going to ask Peter if you could, if you can address this question, and then if we will open it up to the floor, and if any other panelists would like to address this one.
Yes, thank you, Amanda. Let me add on the issue of the stakeholders. And I concur completely with what Addington has already mentioned, that when we talk about stakeholders, we are talking about individuals, we are talking about organizations, we are talking about entities, which mainly they are social entities, that can be affected by a project or themselves can affect a project. And when it comes to the project, I can give an example with our project, which is focusing on cities. When you go to various cities, you find that there are quite a number of conspicuous stakeholders. The first one that is very conspicuous is about the authorities, the municipalities that are in charge. They make policies, they make decisions on what to be done in those particular cities. So that is one key stakeholder. When it comes to other organizations, for example, when we talk about the private sector, the issue of industrialization and job creation in the urban areas, the private sector has a very key role to play. Because if we talk about development, infrastructure, residential areas, talking about the social facilities like building of schools, expanding the hospitals in the urban areas. The private sector has to be very instrumental because of what we term as a private-public partnership in development. So when it comes to people themselves, and people themselves, we put them under the blanket of civil society. You realize that in cities, we have people who have formed community-based organizations. And these community-based organizations, they are dealing with specific issues, like talk about issues to do with the health, issues to do with the education, literacy, improvement in the cities, and in various informal settlement in our cities. So you find also people, they organize themselves into community-based organizations. And of course, in Africa, it is a country where religion is very strong. So you also find in cities, we have what we refer to as faith-based organizations. And all these organizations, they have a stake because they represent people who can be affected by any project or any engagement that is going on in the cities. So I think in terms of broadness, the word stakeholder depends so much on the focus. Because when, for example, if you go outside Africa, and probably you go to a country in Europe, you may not find very important, for example, to talk about hawkers, those people who just move around selling items. But when it comes to African cities, you'll find that those hawkers who move from one place selling items in the cities, and sometimes they conflict with the authorities, they have an association. So whenever you are making decisions, whenever you are coming up with a project, they must be part and parcel of that process. So that is what I can add for that. And I think it is, you can understand that it depends sometimes with the context of what is there as a stakeholder. And we have to dig deep to get to know who can be affected or who can affect that particular project. And of course, the research institutions and researchers, they're the people who are creating knowledge, they are creating new frameworks, they are creating new ideas on how to tackle these challenges. They have to work hand in hand with all the other stakeholders to find the solutions to the ailing problems in the cities. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Peter. Is there anyone else who would like to give a comment on this question?
Yes, I'm going to be very brief. So the solution space that we are dealing with, as I described earlier, is low-income housing. We have within our built environment communities, people who know how to improve the performance of the housing in terms of affordability, sustainability, and resilience. So from a technical perspective, we know how to do several things. We don't know how to do everything, but we know how to do several things. Now, the challenge we have, you would have stories like an architect going to Ghana and helping 100 people, somebody going to Mexico and helping 1,000 people. And that is very good. And we are happy for those people. But then the problem space has millions, 100,000 million. So the question we were trying to ask, the question that I've been trying to ask for the last 10 years is, how do we get to the point where we can start seeing bigger numbers? 10,000 community members benefiting from this affordable, resilient, sustainable housing. So from that perspective, we defined the stakeholders as who needs to be around the table to help with scaling or help with the acceleration. And we use the analogy, I use the analogy of what they do in the medical field and also agriculture. In the medical field, you guys use this from the bench to the bedside, right? And we try to do a mapping of, who's gonna help with translating this to policymakers, who's gonna help to translating this to the woman in the slum in Nairobi, who is going to help with translating this to the building code officials. And that is how we defined our stakeholders.
Excellent. Eleanor, why don't you, do you have a comment here?
I could just add two points. You were asking about inclusion of stakeholders within the proposal, which I assume means linking to stakeholders who are within the funding. And within our project, that's actually been quite difficult because it doesn't fund non-academics, or in a very, very limited capacity. So I think the message, the general message I give is to be clear about how you're going to achieve outcomes with different stakeholders and what you can pragmatically do as a transdisciplinary research team within 3 years to have an impact. And to understand that process is one thing. And the second thing is also working with stakeholders who can work with researchers and vice versa, but researchers who can work with non-academic stakeholders. I think that's been a lot of learning from, for instance, we have artists within our project. How do you work with researchers? And I think that needs to be thought about beforehand. Thank you.
Yeah, Amanda, I'd just add, for people who aren't familiar with Belmont or transdisciplinarity, it's probably useful just to define the term for people. So transdisciplinary research involves multiple disciplines, but also is very closely integrated with stakeholders, which is why we're talking so much about stakeholders here. But for instance, in my field, it's very common to work across disciplines, ecologists working with climate change scientists. That happens all the time. But transdisciplinary research would suggest a broader suite of disciplines and helping define research objectives with stakeholders, which is likely to take many researchers outside of their comfort zone. So it's worth looking into the definition of transdisciplinarity and understanding the centrality of it for Belmont as you design a proposal.
Yes, thank you, Lee, so much for that definition. That is really important there. And so I heard a lot of great things there, you know, Addington talking about how stakeholders really talking about the people who are benefiting or affected by a project, and Esther talking about, you know, how can we reach out to more stakeholders? How can we reach these thousands of stakeholders numbers so that we're getting these meaningful effects? And then Eleanor talking about being pragmatic with who you're choosing as stakeholders, and Peter discussing, you know, those important public-private partnerships that because they're can have really big impacts on infrastructure development. So those were all really wonderful answers. I think we will move on to the next question here. So, and this has already been touched on just a bit, but the Belmont Forum has a relatively complex process for eligibility, where the overall project team must meet call text requirements, but also the minimum of 3 project participants need to be eligible according to different funding agency annexes. And the guidelines in each annex can vary by funding agency, but each one needs to be followed in order for the overall project team to be eligible. So maybe we can start up here with Peter. What steps did you take to ensure that all annex guidelines were properly followed across your project team so that you could ensure that your proposal was eligible for funding?
Thank you, Amanda, for the question. And this is the question about funding. And for our participants, it's always good to know that if you go wrong with the budget, you go wrong with so many things in the proposal, because the budget is about how you will be able to actualize the whole proposal. So when it comes to funding, and this is specifically to Belmont Forum format, or you know, the format of how the projects are funded. So it is very important to note that sometimes it can be very tricky, because the funding for Belmont Forum projects are not from one particular funding agency. They come from different agencies. And sometimes you may assume that all these agencies, they are giving you money. And that is very wrong, because you come to know that some of the funding agencies, they have committed to provide in-kind contribution, which is not monetary. And for me and my team, we were very keen from the beginning, because the instructions were very clear. They were very clear that we have to get funding from at least 3 agencies, or support from at least 3 agencies. And one thing that sometimes people may also misunderstand is that Belmont Forum has all answers to all questions that you may be having for your proposal. So I want to make it very clear that from our experience, the issue of funding, Belmont Forum can only give you the information. They can only direct you to where you can get the correct and precise information as pertains to the funding agencies. So for us, we had to follow the links, the online links that were provided by Belmont Forum on the website, and we had to contact these particular funding agencies. We had to write emails. We had to get clarification on what they are offering in terms of monetary support. And if it's not monetary support, we had to be very clear that they are offering in-kind contribution. And it is only after realizing what the funding agencies are offering for you, then you can, with finality, conclude on the issue of the budget. So for me, my advice is to tell all the participants that it is always very important to follow up with the specific funding agencies. And that is where you're going to get more information. I had a lot of questions from the beginning, especially from Belmont Forum, before I realized I have to chase with my funding agencies instead. But I'm very happy that Belmont Forum was able to answer the questions as up to the level they can. But for other details and the specifics, we received those specifics from the specific funding agencies that we were contacting for our proposal.
Excellent, Peter. That's a wonderful answer. And I appreciate knowing that you reached out to the Belmont Forum and to the different funding agencies. I do think that that is key to really understanding all of the eligibility requirements that are in each of the annexes. Let's see, let's give this question now to Eleanor. Can you talk to us a little bit about the annexes and how you ensured your team was eligible?
Yeah, I'd echo very similar points to Peter. Obviously, read very, very carefully all the guidelines. Contact the agencies if you have initial questions. Once you have what you think of your team in place, follow up with the funding agencies, ask the Belmont Forum again. You don't want to get into a situation where you submit your proposal and then it's knocked out without being considered because you have missed something in this case. It's not easy. I will say that. It was quite a headache, with not an easy process to follow at all in this respect, but you have lots of help and support there, particularly from the Belmont Forum and also from others. One other point I would flag up is that it creates inequalities within the research team according to what different funding agencies will support. And actually that's quite something hidden and it's quite difficult to handle. For instance, I was funded from the UK. I have very high overhead costs for my time covered because my funding agency does that, whereas my colleagues in the Netherlands have no cost for their time. They can only have a PhD. So this can create tensions in your research team. So I think this is something to be aware of when you're putting together the proposal that's never spoken about. Thank you.
Yeah, and Amanda, if I can just add a couple of things. I think for beginners, it's important to know that there's a suite of countries involved in Belmont, but they're not involved in every call. So just because you're friends in Brazil, friends that got funding from Belmont for a call, that doesn't necessarily mean that Brazil is participating in the next call that comes out. So the very first thing to do is just look through and see what countries are participating. I'd also think it's important to mention that for developing country scientists, most of the Belmont participating funding agencies are developed country, but there's sometimes opportunities for developing country scientists to participate as sort of international cooperation agencies are involved. So our Cambodia work had support for the Cambodia team through the French international cooperation system. CETA is supporting our Kenyan team in the Mozambique work. So there are opportunities for developing country scientists, but they're rarer, and you need to figure out how you can work together with developing country scientists often. So Peter and others may have insights in that, how to make that work, but it can work, but it's not easy.
Yeah,
so I wanted to add a couple of things just very briefly. And then one of them is the obvious thing that's usually right under our nose and sometimes we ignore. Each university has a proposal support office. At Penn State, we call it the Penn State Sponsored Research Office. And one of the first things I did when I looked at the solicitation and I realized how complex it was, this was the first for me. So when I looked at it, like applying to NSF sometimes is a little bit of a headache and we know how to deal with those. But when I looked at it and went and looked at the funding agency in Brazil, for example, and it was in Portuguese, and I was like, okay, I put in a request to proposal processing right away. And I was like, complicated, complex proposal being submitted and the deadline. And the person reached back, I reached out to her and she responded right away. And we sat down and went through everything together and developed a checklist for what we need to do as the lead institution to get these things submitted on time. And that was very, very helpful because all the things that I needed from the partner institution, I kept just forwarding the email. Like I went through this with her. So it had my views in there. So I kept using that, to remind the person in the UK, like, this is what I need from you. You haven't given me this. And it included, make sure you get in touch with your program officer in the UK Funding Research Institute. Have you done that? So that's just something I wanted to put on the table, that many times we reach out to them at the very end or close to the end, and we miss out on this opportunity to strategize as partners.
I just want to add here to comment off of what Lee and Esther has said. So yeah, Lee, you are correct that, many of the funding agencies represented are from the developing world. And one thing to note is that you might not be aware that those funding agencies can support other countries besides themselves. And so this is something that you want to look for closely in the annex. And that's why it's really important to look at those individual annexes to see who is covered. And then let's see, there was one other thing that I wanted to say, Esther, that was following on your comment that has just slipped my mind. So if it comes back to me, I will come back to it. Thank you.
Is it helpful if I say sponsored research? Does that help?
We do work with a lot of sponsored research agencies. Yes, what Erica is saying there is that the checklist is a really good idea. Oh, I remember what it was. And it's that the contact information for the person from the funding agency who you would need to contact and ask any questions to regarding that particular annex is also found in the annex. So you can't just contact anyone from that funding agency based on the overall organization. You need to find that specific person in the Belmont Forum annex to contact. I think Addington had maybe another thing to add.
Yes, I just want to let people know that it is also important to be sure that your country is eligible to participate. I met one of the Belmont Forum staff, Makiba Charles Ayinde, in a totally different contexts. A feature head event, I think it was in Taipei, and we got talking, and I got to know that Africans generally are not well represented in Belmont Forum. So we invited her to give a talk about Belmont Forum to members of the International Society for Environmental Epidemiology last year. And when I look at, she came with a graphic, I think that picture spoke a lot, and really it's the right chord in many people. When you look at the spread of the fund and you look at the global south, especially Africa, it was so scanty. So, and the challenge now is that the information is out there, a call is coming on. What are you Africans going to do? So the first thing I did, I worked in a research institute as an adjunct, and you need to have an institution to sponsor in a country. So I reached out to all the academicians in my country, Nigeria, talked to many other people, different parts of Africa, that you have this fund. We've been complaining that we don't get funded on what we want to do, but we are not even eligible to apply because we've not done the paperwork. So I was lucky, and kudos to some of them are here, to Nigeria Institute for Medical Research. They took it on with me, and they eventually registered with Belmont Forum. They were able to provide in-kind for now, and I'm glad. Peter does not know how happy I am to know that Nigeria is part of his project, and also I know about 2 or 3 people from Nigeria now who won one of the last call from Belmont. But it is simply because somebody took the step to get their country registered, to get their country to be part of Belmont Forum. So my plea to everyone, especially people from Africa that are on this call, please go to the Belmont Forum site to check if your country is eligible. If not, look at what you need to do. Please, my email, I'll post it here. Contact me if you're from Africa. I really want Africa to do this work and speak for themselves, so that you can also get your country, an institution in your country, to join Belmont Forum, so that Esther, Peter, and the likes of Lee and Eleanor, they can find people to work with. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adetin. That's really wonderful. You have a wonderful soapbox for us. Yes, we encourage all of the global funding agencies to join the Belmont Forum. That's one of our more simple processes. So if you know how to make that happen, we encourage it. So I want to make sure that we have enough time for questions at the end. So I'm going to just try to get us quickly through these next few questions. So let's see, I am going to direct this question at Esther. All proposals need to be submitted in English. With multilingual teams working together on a proposal, how did language factor into your project? And taking it further, how did it factor into project outputs? And what outputs were disseminated in partner languages, and how so?
Okay, so thank you. So we are having to deal with this, like we dealt with it before the proposal development, during the proposal development, and also right now we are dealing with it. The project that I'm leading has partners from Brazil, and they are there both as people we are co-creating with and people who've also had this more than 40 years of experience of working in the space of affordable alternative building technologies. A lot of the documents that they have are in Portuguese, and a lot of the people who they intersect with are Portuguese speakers. But thankfully, because of these conferences, we also made sure that there's at least 2 people in the team who can speak both English and Portuguese, and there's just no way around this, that during the conversations that we were having while preparing the proposal or talking about how we are going to address certain things, somebody was translating back to the Portuguese speakers everything that was being said in Portuguese. In fact, we have a joke, like right now I'm working with an architect who's in Brazil who is representing some stakeholders, and she speaks very little English. So when we have our calls, she's getting better. And she explained to me that when Homer, who's from Brazil, speaks, he speaks Portuguese English. So there's no need for translation. But we've just gotten very comfortable with making sure that there's enough time for somebody to translate from English to Portuguese and then vice versa. And then I'm also, like, for example, doing a stakeholder engagement workshop in collaboration with Engineering for Change in Tanzania. We are collaborating with Alumni University, and it's the same thing. Like, we just acknowledge the fact that they do business in Kiswahili. So we have to have a translator. Like, I speak Kiswahili, I can do some translation, but the documents that we're talking about have technical information. So we have to interface with a person who can translate technical content into Kiswahili and vice versa, translate it back into English. And our team has just gotten very comfortable with having meetings where the translation of text, of content, of conversation and text to different languages is happening. And it's actually become kind of fun. Like, we are picking up one word, two words in Portuguese as we go along.
That's excellent, Esther. So do you hire someone, or who is doing this translation work for you?
So it was part of the networking. Sorry if I wasn't clear about that, that as part of the networking, when we realized that we are going to have a submission from the University of Sao Paulo, we made sure that there was a member of the team who's fluent in both English and also in Portuguese. And then other things is just being lucky, I guess, like with the Engineering for Change synergies that we've developed. They have a network in Brazil, and they very calmly just told me when I was trying to think about how to do a stakeholder engagement workshop in Mozambique, and they told me, we have Portuguese speakers, so you don't have to worry. So I think it goes back to networking and just being just very genuine in wanting to make sure that if you want to do an activity in Portuguese, just embracing the fact that, they speak Portuguese. And there has to be someone within the broader network of professionals that we deal with who are Portuguese speakers. In fact, even during this webinar, I identified a Portuguese speaker and I'm reaching out to them. Yeah, so it's networking, like being very strategic about your networking, not just looking for the professional skills, but also making sure that the professionals who are in the team represent more than one language.
Okay, that's interesting. So it sounds like you're saying sort of from the beginning, you were making sure that all of the language and the translational skills were going to be in-house within your project. Well,
that is correct. And it's partly like just one final comment there in relation to the inequality issue that came up. Inequalities happen because of financial reasons, but it can also happen because of language barriers. And we did not want to have that.
Excellent. Even though we could probably talk about that question all day, I'm going to actually have us move on so we have some more time. And I will have just one person respond to this next question. So let's see. A critical component to the success of Belmont Forum proposals is the utilization of co-production, co-design, participatory methods, and team science. These are all, kind of similar terminology there. Tell us how you include these elements in a proposal at the beginning when synthesizing a large project team's ideas into one thoughtful, innovative, and synthesized proposal. Maybe Lee or Eleanor, you could take this one.
Eleanor, do you want to go briefly and then I'll say something quickly?
Yeah, I can. I'm lucky because I'm a participatory development specialist. So I was the person who maybe brought these skills into a team who weren't necessarily so familiar. In a very simple way, we were quite inclusive when we were talking about our ideas and when we were just formulating the proposal initially. Then we got quite, we just had a small team, myself and a couple of colleagues actually synthesizing the ideas, pragmatically putting the proposal in. Then the co-production process really starts after you've got the funding, in all honesty, unless you have a particular research funding stream which gives you an initial stage where you can do proper co-design. But I think it was this initially having an open, inclusive conversation, bringing people in, talking over Skype, and then just pragmatically pulling the proposal together where you actually don't want too much co-production, you just want to get a really good proposal on paper. Thank you, Lee.
Yeah, and just two quick things to add. I think a co-production and co-design are really about researchers working together with stakeholders. There's a tension at the beginning, I think, in the Belmont proposals because there will be a theme to the call, and you'll have to decide what your research theme is. But you have to maintain an open enough mind that as you get into the research, the objectives and the outputs can be determined with the folks you're working with. And if you have a strong social science component to your team, then that maybe comes from that part of the team. If you don't, you may need to engage somebody who knows about co-production and co-design specifically to help you learn how to do that. So, because in my case, it's a biologist. I have no idea how to do that, or some, but not my specialty certainly. So seeking someone who's a good co-designer. Our co-designer, for instance, is someone who worked to help design hospitals and buildings, and now she's doing research co-design with us.
Oh, it's so interesting to hear those two different perspectives. One is a person who does co-design and participatory methods, and the other person who's bringing someone in who really knows those principles to be able to infuse them throughout your entire team. So I think we will get to our last question now, and then we will move on to questions from our audience. And so this one is addressed to Addison. So when you were reviewing proposals, what aspects of a proposal stood out to you as making the most positive or negative impact on your merit review evaluation? There typically is a wide variety in the types of projects and approaches that are utilized by successful Belmont Forum proposals. What common thread, if any, did you find across meritorious proposals that you reviewed? Oh, you're on mute.
So there are two things that are key, irrespective of what the topic is or is all about when you're writing a research fund. One is the intellectual merit, that you will want a proposal that demonstrates that there is a clear understanding of the need in that research space. And whatever proposal is proposing is advancing knowledge in that field and in other disciplines. So it is very important that you are contributing to knowledge. And the second one is a strong program management skills that has to be demonstrated. A funder wants to give money to a team they are sure will be good steward of their resources. You want to be sure that they have a coordination plan that is convincing and adequate. You want to be sure that their operational plan is not tilted to one place. Specifically for Belmont Forum, I'm not going to go about transdisciplinary. A lot of us have mentioned about that. But even at that, if a proposal is targeting Global South, you don't just want people from Global South that are just there, just to tick the box. You want to know what specifically is their contribution in that research. So you don't want a research that is targeting Global South and somebody in Global North wrote the research, 90% or 95% of the fund goes there, then you just have somebody whose name is just appended to that research. You don't want that. And another thing is sustainability post the research. The data stewardship, how is it going to live longer than the research? So for me, irrespective of the topic or whatever, intellectual merit of a proposal is very important, that you are contributing to knowledge, the solution, it's applicable, and like I said, the impact to the society, it's measurable, and we know what it is. Please permit me to add this. Some of the common trends, like Amanda asked me, it's often common for people who already have a network to see a fund and just apply for it because they already have a research group. And one of the common trends that you see is that you ask yourself, what exactly are they going to do with this fund that the existing network they have cannot achieve? Oftentimes we don't get that. So it happens that we already have a research team, we're working together, and we are coming to the end of our research, and we just want another fund to continue doing this, not thinking of maybe there are skills we don't currently have that we could bring in, or another way to also adapt our research team to suit the cause. So I've talked about intellectual merit, advancing knowledge in not just one discipline, strong project management skill, convincing coordination plan, and to be sure that the resources you're asking for, you can justify it and it is indeed adequate. And if it is targeting Global South, don't just put somebody from Global South as an appendage just to tick the box. It won't work for Belmont because they go to so much details. The other one is the impact to the society. How are you going to translate your project outcome to things that are going to benefit the society, policy development, change in practice? Like I said earlier, nowadays, it is research to build bridge, to solve problem, not just to science for the sake of science. And after the project, what's next? Will there be sustainability of the data or some of the work you're doing? And are you developing people? We also want, Belmont often, when we look at your team composition, you don't want a research team that is full of Esthers of this world, or Helena, or Lee. You also want a postdoc, young people. So you look at it that they bring in some young people because you also want to use this to develop other people and succession planning. Thank you.
That is an excellent note to end on, Addison. Thank you so much for those comments. And we may be able to, I want us to jump into the questions with the audience now. And we may be able to go over a few minutes if our panelists are amenable to that. And just in case you have to jump off early, though, I want to thank all our panelists and really encourage you to come to the second in the Be Belmont Applicable series, which is this Wednesday, May 19th at 9 a.m. Eastern, same time, same place, and on the SRI virtual conference platform. And we will take really detailed questions for creating a proposal and making sure you're eligible during that session. So the questions that you ask our panelists, please keep them broad and at a higher level so that they are relevant to everyone who's here. I'm going to ask Erica and Megan, did we get any questions in the chat that we can jump off with?
We did have a really nice discussion going around stakeholders. We had comments from Felix and a reference to a paper that he shared and some follow-up from Vina Pearl and Agus.
Okay, well, if any of you want to ask questions, go ahead and unmute yourself now, and we would be happy to take them. And if not, I can keep asking questions, of course, but I'll give you a few minutes. Any brave soul want to jump in? We promise we won't bite.
While somebody's waiting to jump in, I just wanted to give a really upbeat point, which is my project has the most fantastic team of researchers from Burkina Faso, Uganda, Brazil, Ghana, I don't know where else, young researchers. It didn't look like it was possible to incorporate them at first, and it has just been the most fantastic experience for everyone and learning. And so I would really encourage people to apply for one of these grants.
So I also want to add something. In addition to working with young people, we have the privilege and pleasure of working with a distinguished professor who brings in 60 years worth of experience. He's in his mid-80s, and I'm just so excited that this amazing professor of climate science is now contributing to the development of his juniors, which includes all the rest of us. And he's not tired, he's like wanting to make a change. The reason why he's doing this is because of what I shared earlier on, that the flooding that is happening in Kenya, Tanzania, and very many countries right now breaks his heart. So he's putting off retirement, and we're excited to have 60 years worth of experience at our fingertips in our group.
And we actually received a question in the chat, so I just want to address this quickly. This question comes from Max, and it was about what types of expertise could be on a proposal, and he mentions that he's a lawyer. So we do support many disciplines, and it really depends on the annex. So you need to read the annex to see if there is any distinguishing of who can be involved or request funding. So what we can include disciplines such as architects, law, historians, those in mathematics. The main point is that the team that's assembled should be appropriate for the project and to meet the Belmont Forum minimum requirements for transdisciplinarity and co-production. It looks like we have another question, maybe a question related to the role of young people. Is there actually funding to hire PhDs or postdocs? Erica, do you want to help me out with this question?
Sure, be glad to. And actually, I was going to ask Megan if she would also like to chime in on this. So yes, annexes will indicate whether or not there is funding for PhDs and postdocs, and that is a question you can ask to those funders. But sometimes we partner with programs that specifically target student or early career participation in transdisciplinary activity. And we're working on a program called Future Leaders. So I want to turn over to Megan to talk more about that.
Yeah, so Future Leaders is a CRA that we are currently scoping, and our first scoping meeting is going to be at SRI. It's going to be on June 14th at 8 a.m. Eastern. I'm not sure what time that is on Brisbane in this program, but we would welcome you all to join. And this is trying to get training programs into a lot of our funding organizations so that we can train young people like postdocs, graduate students, maybe even younger. So the scoping event is going to help us develop kind of the overall view of this program and how we want to tailor it. So if you guys have any, advice for us or specifics that you would like to see in this new CRA, we welcome you to join us at that scoping event.
Yes, and I just wanted to, I am working on doing a screen share quickly. So I know I said I was going to share with you all at the Belmont Applicable technical submission, our upcoming calls for research, but I'm feeling generous today. And so I'm going to share with you just a quick sneak peek for that. I'm not really giving you any details here, just the overall themes that will be covered. So as Megan mentioned, we have future leaders that we are scoping right now. There will also be the second in the climate, environment, and health collaborative research action. That's what we call our themes that we provide funding for. We'll have a call on systems of sustainable consumption and production, migration and mobility, which is going to be a fascinating CRA. And then we also will have, and this is relevant for Peter, we will have a second in the series for the Pathways to Sustainability research call. The first call that Peter is a part of is a networking call, whereas this next one will be a full-fledged research. So those are the opportunities that we anticipate supporting going forward. And I think we may be to the minute out of time here. Do we have any last questions that anyone would like to ask? No? Okay. Well, with that then, I would like to go ahead and thank our panelists so much for being here today and for supporting us. And I want to encourage all of our participants here to come engage with us, to come to SRI. What you've heard here today is that a lot of our panelists had their networks pre-established, and that was a valuable aspect that they had going into applying for Belmont Forum funding. And it's really true that, you know, meeting different experts across varying disciplines can be difficult. You can do it at conferences, but the Sustainability Research and Innovation Congress will be the premier way for you to build your networks for projects that are Belmont applicable. So come meet folks like us so that we can all work together and develop local solutions for our climate change challenges. And don't forget to join us for Be Belmont Applicable on Wednesday for our technical submission. With that, I think we will call this session to a close, but I just want to thank our panelists and our audience so much for being here with us. And don't forget to keep up with us, join us on social media, check out our Belmont Forum website, go ahead and send us email. We're happy to talk with you. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Have a nice day. Take care.
Thank
We hope to
you.
hear from you
Thank
soon.
you, Amanda.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay. We lost Amanda.
We lost Amanda.
Is host 500 Amanda?
I'm not sure who that is.
That's the person running the platform, right?
Host 500. No, we're all host. If you are a host in the session, you're host 500 when you come in.
Okay. I can't remove host 500. So it's got to be somebody running things.
Yeah, so it's definitely a host. Oh,
Oh, just left. Okay. Do we stop
well.
recording?
yes.